Today, I want to talk to you all about a little project I've been working on called the Ransomware Tool Matrix. Um, it's it's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and I just thought you have to put it all together. But a little bit about me. So I've been a CTI analyst and threat hunter for the last 5 years or so. Worked for UK companies, and now I work for a big American company remotely. I'm also the co-author of the SANS Cybercrime Intelligence course, and also uh, do all sorts of other stuff as well in the community, go to conferences, to run workshops, and like I mentioned earlier, run 2600 as well. So yeah, lots of things I get involved with and happy to talk about if anyone else is interested. But today I want to talk to you about the threat of ransomware, as some of us may be well aware, how they are using templated attacks and knowledge sharing, and then how we can exploit this with the ransomware tool matrix, as well as some bit of threat intelligence and threat hunting. Um, so the threat of ransomware. So let's just recap how bad ransomware is. So there's a little quote that I like to use that I've not seen anyone else sort of claim it as their own, so I'm going to claim it. Is ransomware is the most profitable way to monetize access to any network. Basically, if you think about back in the day when companies with that would often hold card data were the big targets, that was a specific type of network that handled specific types of data. Whereas nowadays, it doesn't matter if you're a hotel or a cardboard box factory or a bank. If ransomware gets in and holds you to ransom, they can monetize it. So you don't have to have valuable data these days. It's just whether you run your operations with using IT, you become a target for ransomware. Um, so the ransom war wages on. Some good stats that came out from Chainalysis in the last sort of half one of 2024. Unfortunately, ransom payments just keep getting higher. We're actually may not be seeing quite as many ransomware attacks individual, but the payments keep on getting higher on average. So halfway through 2023, the average ransom payment was only $200,000 USD, but now halfway through mid-June, it's already at 1.5 million, which is pretty crazy. And if you think we actually saw the largest ransom payment almost ever, I think it's probably ever so far, is an unknown, undisclosed company has reportedly paid $75 million to one of the ransomware gangs known as the Dark Angels. So things aren't looking great for the time being. Things keep getting a bit worse. We did see some great big law enforcement actions and disruptions to take down some of the biggest groups, such as Lockbit, and then we've seen sort of pressure on ransomware gangs such as Black Cat for them to sort of go and exit the scene in some way. Sort of performed a bit of an exit scam. And ever since then, we've seen a lot of splintering and rebranding, and since the two big ransomware gangs are kind of shutting down, we've seen all sorts of sort of miniature ransomware gangs popping up. And it's getting a bit more difficult to tackle of a challenge if there's not one single point of failure, no ransomware platform. Law enforcement can just go after that and shut it down. Now it's kind of turned into a hydra with many heads. Um, let's think about how the leak sites are looking in the first half of 2024. So these are companies that basically didn't pay the ransom and had their data leaked and published to some of these dark web Tor sites. So Lockbit was still number one at the midway point of 2024, which is kind of interesting because they were pretty much hacked by law enforcement, had their servers shut down, and had all their affiliates basically leave them and things, but they were still posting victim data. But the interesting thing is when you analyze that victim data, they didn't tend to be from 2024. They tended to be from like 20, even far back as 2023 and 2022. So it seems like the admin of Lockbit, Dimitri, as we have sort of saw his face on the most wanted list, He's seems to be continuing to post victims' data to the site, despite despite having all actually being taken down. But then we see groups like Play and Akira, Ransom Hub, very much up in the top three, competing for the top spot. So definitely all of these groups you want to keep an eye on and make sure that you're aware of how they operate and your systems are prepared for them. Some other good trends to be aware of that Microsoft reported that there's a load of ransomware gangs exploiting a vulnerability in VMware ESXi hypervisors, where if adversaries inside your network, they can easily pivot to your hypervisors by just adding ESX admins, to the ESX admins a domain group. So then basically pivot straight to your hypervisor, encrypt all your VMs, and jackpot for them. Scattered Spider, probably an adversary group some of us have heard of before. They've been responsible for some of the biggest high-profile attacks in recent years. MGM, Resorts, other companies as well. I think Okta and Twilio have also been attacked by this gang, and they've sort of recently split and been they were a Black Cat affiliates, and they kind of left Black Cat and have joined Jilin and Ransom Hub lately, also reported by Microsoft. We've also seen some nation state groups using ransomware, so Chinese APTs and North Korean APTs have sort of been using ransomware as well. I mean, Iran as well. And then we've also seen some interesting TTPs from the Black Basta ransomware gang, who's been using voice phishing, calling up targets at large companies and trying to get them to use Microsoft Quick Assist, which is a pretty simple way to get in and getting them to download tools, and then gaining initial access that way. We've seen sort of exploitation of public-facing systems. In this case, it was ClickSense. And then we actually saw a massive data center in Scandinavia called Tietoevry, which is used by Finland and Sweden and things. And they had all their sort of government services and education sector were relying on these data centers and the services they provide. And they were all disrupted by an Akira ransomware attack. So that's a pretty notable case study to look at as well for large impacting ransomware attacks this year. And then Akira ransomware has basically been exploiting the same vulnerability, Cisco VPNs, for quite some time. This is just basically where Cisco vulnerability in Cisco VPNs, where it had a no rate limiting brute force attack and no multi-factor authentication turned on. So they could just brute force these thousands of Cisco VPNs around the world, and eventually they'd get in, and then eventually they'd go and launch ransomware as well. So if you run Cisco VPNs, definitely be aware of this campaign. And they've recently switched to Sonic Wall VPNs as well and using the same sort of bug. This is a slide I added last night just to kind of bring home how bad of an issue this is for the UK as well, and all of us, because we're all UK taxpayers, right? So at the end of the day, this all comes down and affects us. We're seeing lots of councils in the UK being infected and encrypted by ransomware. Most recently, we had the Tewkesbury Council, Southwark Council as well. A few others that you may recognize. Gloucester was hit by Conti. Yeah, I mean it's not great, and it's not great because these attacks are pretty straightforward and simple to stop, as you will see from the ransomware tool matrix. So templating and attacks and hacking manuals. Why do we see the same things being used over and over again by these ransomware groups? Well, basically, the ransomware gangs reuse the same TTPs for attacks. They are efficient, they are scalable. If you can figure out one way to launch a ransomware attack and then scale it up to use it against multiple companies, then you can just bring people on board and you just scale up your ransomware attacks. And this is why we saw Lockbit and Conti and things hit like the 500 or 1,000 victim leaked victims published on their sites as well. And those are just the ones we know about. Those are just the companies that didn't pay the ransom. Maybe there's another 500 more that did pay a ransom. You never know. hacking manuals and ransomware playbooks. This is another reason. This is another reason that contributes to why we see the same TTPs and tools being used over and over again in these ransomware attacks. So Conti Conti ransomware was one of the largest ransomware gangs at the time during sort of 2021, 2022 era. They have been responsible for, 800, 900, 1,000 different ransomware attacks individually as one gang. And they basically would give out a manual, sort of recruit people, pay them a sort of a monthly salary to start launching ransomware gangs as part of like a criminal enterprise, a truly organized cybercrime group. And they would give these sort of new employees a playbook of how to launch a ransomware attack, and they would be literally copying and pasting commands, reusing the same tools over and over again, and they just scaled it up and were able to launch so many ransomware campaigns. I think that the amount of money they made from ransomware was in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year. It was insane. And then you've also got the Bastillor networking manuals. Bastillor is an individual threat actor who's actually been sanctioned by OFAC now, the US Treasury, Ivan Kondratayev. He had been an affiliate of all sorts of different ransomware gangs, so Lockbit, REvil, RansomX, Abaddon. He'd been associated with all these different ransomware gangs, and he decided to explain to other threat actors how he was being so successful. So he wrote like a little manual of how to run ransomware attacks as well himself. So that's why you may see other threat actors borrowing that and using that themselves. So let's think about all the different ways we can leverage this information. Does anyone know what this little pyramid is called? This little triangle? Feel free to shout it out. If not, this is the pyramid of pain. Basically, David Bianco, he created this pyramid to actually explain how you can stop threat actors sort of from launching attacks against your network. If you think about all the different artifacts you get from sort of incident response or digital forensics, basically whilst you're doing intrusion analysis, you can actually take a look. And if you start blocking these and stopping these, so adding IOC, so hash values, IP addresses, domain names, adding these to sort of block lists on your endpoints or in your firewalls or something, writing detection rules for host networking artifacts. These are sort of annoying and simple to kind of stop. But for an attacker, if an organization has blocked all of your tools, then it's pretty challenging to stop that. And if they block the way that you use your tools as well, that's it basically almost impossible to try and get around. You have to completely redesign your attack. And we can get this information from threat reports. So ransomware activities are regularly made available. We can extract the TTPs from these threat reports. We can extract what tools they're using, and then we can write detections and block things as well. That's the main aim of what we want to do. That's the main reason we want to use this ransomware tool matrix. So the different types of ransomware adversaries. So we've got ransomware gangs, affiliates, initial access brokers, state-sponsored groups as well. There's all sorts of different adversaries involved in this sort of ransomware economy. It's not just one ransomware gang launching attacks by itself. One ransomware gang may be like a ransomware as a service platform, and then we have 20, 50, 100 affiliates, and those affiliates may also be using other ransomware platforms. So you may have one affiliate that's using 5 different ransomware platforms as well. And then you've got the initial access brokers who may be selling access to all sorts of different affiliates, and it all just basically becomes merged together in one giant ransomware conglomerate. So reasons we know this is from some of the threat reports we get. So CISA puts out some good stuff. The US agency has a sort of a stop ransomware report. So if you're really interested in learning more about the ransomware gangs and what the TTPs and tools and things each group use, you can go through those. I went through, extracted all of the tools from these. I went through and extracted all the tools from the DFIR report as well. pretty similar to the CISA ones, just going through explaining step by step how a ransomware attack takes place. And we can use it to actually build a matrix of tools used by ransomware gangs. So we can actually exploit the fact that these tools are reused. You will see if you go through all of those reports and other third-party sources as well, you will see that these tools are constantly reused over and over again by sometimes 10, 15, 25 different ransomware gangs. And once I extracted all the tools from all of these reports, you just get this massive list of ways that threat actors can get into your network. And I kind of broke them down to different categories. So it kind of looks a little bit like the MITRE ATT&CK framework in some way, but it's based on what tools adversaries, these ransomware gangs, are using. So, 43 different RMM tools, 41 different credential theft tools. There's a real variety of stuff being used here, but there's also a lot being reused as well. So the most used tools. So once I had gone through that process, I then created this page of most used tools so I could see which tools have been used by at least 10 or more ransomware gangs. So for example, Cobalt Strike, I think it was used by something like 25 different ransomware gangs. Not too surprising if you know what Cobalt Strike is. PSExec and Soft Perfect Network Scanner, we've seen that in so many intrusions as well by so many different ransomware gangs. Rclone and Mega, these are two tools that are kind of used in conjunction a lot of the time, but can be used by themselves as well. Basically, if you see these tools being downloaded or you see external sort of network egress connections to these things, it's likely a ransomware gang is in your network and it's likely they're exfiltrating data right now. So trends and discoveries. This is an interesting one. I actually started to build sort of threat group profiles based on what tools they use. So take Scattered Spider, for example. They're actually quite interesting because they use so many different RMM tools. We had, I don't know, something like 25, 30 different RMM tools that this group uses, just because what they like to play a game of kind of like RMM tool roulette, where if they download one, if that one's blocked, they just download another one, and they just keep going and going until eventually they can get something that just sort of punches a hole through the firewall. Other interesting technique tools that this group likes to use is sort of legitimate forensics tools. So some of you may be aware of magnet RAM capture or volatility. These are tools that forensics investigators and things use during incident response or potentially forensics police as well. This group is actually using it to sort of capture the LSAS process and extract credentials from that, sort of OS credential dumping. And then we also see some interesting cloud offensive security tools. So Microburst is used for attacking Azure, and Pacu is used for attacking AWS. And they use a whole wide range of networking tools as well to make sure they can establish that persistence. Pretty interesting group, pretty unique compared to all the other ransomware gangs that just use some of these most used tools. Another interesting trend discovery whilst I was doing this project was I could see the continuity of Conti. So I did actually write a blog a while ago about how Conti was shut down and they rebranded and things, split off into all sorts of splinter groups. But since then, all these reports have come out about what tools are used by these splinter groups, and we can it's just another way to confirm that we are seeing these rebrands of Conti as well, and how these threat actors are all connected to each other. So it's pretty interesting to see them all using, the top 10 tools, and some even more closely than others as well. So Black Basta is kind of the closest thing to being a rebrand of Conti. There's so many tools that they reuse from previous Conti attacks. So it's almost like Conti never went away, really. Especially when you count up the number of victims from Black Suit, Black Basta, and Akira, it is almost like Conti never went away. Yeah, just another example. Vice Society is said to have rebranded to Resider. We actually look at what tools Vice Society use. We look at what tools Resider uses, and 5 out of 10 or whatever are pretty much the same as well. And again, at the end of the day, they're still launching ransomware attacks, they're still leaking data, they're still demanding Bitcoin in return. So a lot of the TTPs are the same. Another interesting discovery was that a couple of these tools are sort of, when I actually went to their pages on GitHub or something, I noticed they were written in Chinese. And this is kind of interesting because we've seen some examples of Chinese threat actors getting involved in the ransomware game. But ransomware, for the most part, is for Russian threat actors only. We see a lot of big forums such as XSS and Exploit and Ramp, these sort of underground forums on the darknet. You're only really able to infiltrate them and communicate with the community if you are a Russian-speaking threat actor. But this was kind of interesting because if you're a Russian-speaking threat actor or an English-speaking threat actor, you're not really going to be using Chinese tools written in Chinese. So maybe that's a potential clue that of this threat actor's origin to me. So actually leveraging the threat actor, the ransomware tool matrix. So we've got some example approaches, but basically it breaks down into, first you want to search for these tools inside your environment. You want to make a list of the ones not installed in your environment and block those. You want to basically raise awareness with your teams, whether you have an IT team or developers. Make sure that they only download the tools that have been pre-approved, and you want to go ahead and remove everything that's not approved. So this is basically the strategy we've been using at work, and it's been pretty successful so far in sort of limiting the adversaries, how successful an adversary could be if they did get inside our environment. That's the main goal here. Just a checklist that you can use, go through the whole ransomware tool matrix and start doing some of that work, start performing the checks and, checking and basically doing this work. That's sort of one of the ways that I started that. But whilst you're going through this, you're going to come across some challenges. You're going to find that many of these tools are legit and they may be currently used by your IT team or your developers or your cybersecurity teams. And you're going to have to come up with a plan of how you're going to deal with that. Are you going to make it so they can only download a tool from a specific location? And if you see something being downloaded from some other random location, you can write a detection rule for that, right? So that's just one example of how you can solve these challenges. But you are going to come up against a lot. Yeah. So knowledge is power. This is what we have to go up against these attackers. We hopefully have asset inventories. Hopefully you are making a map of your attack surface. You're managing what vulnerabilities in your environment. You've got endpoint network protection in place, and you're doing a bit of threat hunting. But on the other side of the coin, you've got your enemy, the ransomware gangs. These are the guys using, all of these tools, all of these different techniques, loads of different attack paths, and their goal is money, and all they have is persistence and time. So if you don't block these tools, eventually they're going to get in. So a fun little quote from Sun Tzu. I mean, how can you have a talk on cyber defense without the the man himself, Art of War? If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you'll never lose in 100 battles. But basically, so if you know every tool the ransomware gangs are using, and you know what tools are inside your environment, and you know what you've blocked, the ransomware gangs are basically never going to get in. But if you don't really know what tools the ransomware gangs are using, and you have a sort of a patchy understanding of your asset inventory, your odds are looking a bit worse. But if you're a company that has no idea about ransomware gangs and they have no asset inventory whatsoever, or no application sort of block list or allow list, then ransomware is also almost a certainty at this point, as we have seen, and has why these tools are effective, right? So just some integrations. I know we're running out of time here, but some integrations. Ransomware Live has got integrated with the ransomware tool matrix. ecrime.ch is integrated with the ransomware tool matrix as well. And I'm inviting you all to get involved as well. So we're accepting pull requests. If you go to the GitHub, there's a how to contribute page if you want to get involved. I've already had researchers from Huntress, Bitdefender, and some of my SANS colleagues have been helping with this as well. But to summarize, ransomware gangs reuse the same tools, and we can exploit this fact. These tools are legit, but we can block them basically because they're using the exact same binaries in many cases. We could just block them. And these tools are also downloaded by the adversary, so we can detect when these things are downloaded and installed as well, right? But yeah, that's everything from me.